Welcome to the EV Charging Podcast, where we take you behind the scenes of the industry in Australia and around the world. I'm Jeff Sykes.
I'm Dan Carson.
And as always, we're brought to you by Solar Choice, Australia's only online quote comparison for solar batteries, EV charging, aircon and heat pump hot water systems. We're back down. It's the new year. Does it feel good to be back in the recording seats?
It does feel a little bit rusty. It's been a few months. Hopefully everyone did okay without us over the holidays. But yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah, and great opportunity fresh in the new year just to take a little bit of a retrospective of what happened during 2025. So dedicating this show to a bit of a reflection and to call out some of the highlights of things that have been achieved. Before we dive into something that happened last year, this actually did happen last year around Christmas. It's a bit of an embarrassing anecdote. So I'll run through it, and if you think it's too embarrassing, then maybe we'll cut it. So
all right, give it to me.
So yeah, picture me, the wife, our 2-year-old son in the car, the BYD Atto. We're driving from Byron Bay down to Coffs Harbour. Got to one of these Tesla supercharger stations. We're not a Tesla, but they're open to all vehicles.
Yes.
And, planned it out. It's exactly the right point on the journey that just a quick 20-minute stop there would get us to Coffs. Mm-hmm. First time at a Tesla charger, I'm downloading the app. There's 12 bays. People are coming and going. I'm struggling through the app. There's like half a bar of reception at this particular place. So
far, this probably sounds very familiar to quite a few listeners.
I think it was a 200 megabyte app or something, and even that was took 15 minutes to download. And then eventually got on there and was able to get my credit card in there and activate the session. But it never started charging. And I'm sitting there, it can take up to 2 minutes to start. Restarted, end up calling Tesla. They completely were baffled by us. They had no explanation. And the only choice was to drive further down the road to an EV station at Tyndale. And we're getting very low, very nervous at that point. We're down at about 5% battery capacity. Drive into the Shell Tyndale and it's offline.
No. So what happened?
So, yeah, about an hour and a half and a tow truck later, we got towed to another station in Grafton. And, yeah, that was a NRMA station. Worked very, very, very easily there and got back on the road.
Shout out to NRMA. Scott Carden, one of our previous guests, maybe had a hand in that engineering.
It was one of their new Sign XL chargers as well, which was nice to try out, but not the start to the Christmas trip that we wanted. So
no, in fact, maybe we shouldn't put this in the episode because it's exactly what the ICE lobby wants to hear. A bit of scare campaign for the front headlines.
But I think, fortunately, they're probably not listening to this.
Yeah. So what do we make of it? It's it's a little bit embarrassing, but I'm sure you're not the only one who's had an experience like that. A bit of a strange one at Tesla. I assume that they were able to see live, look at that charge, look at the analytics, try to figure out what was happening. But
yeah, just completely inexplicable. There was another BYD Atto 3 that pulled up into the charging station, commenced charging while I was there. So just still have never got to the bottom of it. So,
and we haven't said anything bad about Tesla on the podcast, so that doesn't explain it.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sure there's some other listeners out there that possibly have had a similar experience, but on to some more positive reflections on the past year. The numbers are in, and these numbers are from the EV Council and FCAI. Battery EVs sold in 2025 was 103,270. So up from 91,000 the year before. So what we'd probably call that it's about a 10% increase. It's a moderate increase.
Yeah, it's certainly not what people were expecting to see when we were making predictions a few years ago. But it's a really important milestone because we've finally cracked the 100,000 new battery electric vehicles, which is a big important stick for people who follow this stuff closely. Yeah,
that's a good point. And it is growth. We're growing, everyone would have loved it to be 180,000 or something like that. But it's growth, and that's what's important. And I think one of the interesting figures I also saw was that plug-in hybrids jumped above 50,000 this year, which was actually 130% increase on the year before, which was 23,000. So it might have been that a lot of people potentially considering an EV got a plug-in hybrid instead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we got the BYD Shark that came out, which I think a lot of people jumped on being the first kind of plug-in hybrid in that ute category.
Yeah, definitely would have contributed. And we've got a lot of the legacy automakers who've sort of hedged their bets and gone for hybrids, knowing that it's a way to keep their market share, to stop people from going across to these new brands, particularly Chinese brands that are new in the market. I think the legacy brands are hoping to hold on to their customers just long enough until they eventually get their fully fledged battery electrics on the market in the coming years.
Yeah, I think, it is a positive move. Like the plug-in hybrid, ultimately there's some carbon emissions, some petrol use within those vehicles. But a lot of the plug-ins, have 100, but the BYD's got a 100-kilometre range, which for a lot of tradies will be 90% of what they're doing. So it'll be just using the petrol engine for long journeys, or the day that they're travelling from, the inner west out to Liverpool and back, or for a job or something like that. So
that is as long as people with plug-in hybrids are actually plugging them in. And there was some research that came out towards the end of last year suggesting that a shocking number of people who own plug-in hybrids plug them in less than once a month, which is not what we want to see. Some interesting stats that make up those 100,000 plus battery electric vehicles that were sold. Obviously, there's new market entrants, new brands coming over, particularly from China. But I guess the biggest shake-up would have been BYD claiming more and more market share from Tesla. Tesla obviously dropping market share through the year for a range of reasons, from Elon Musk's headlines through to their relatively small range of vehicles compared to some of the other brands that are popping out new models every few months. And in the last few months of 2025, we even saw BYD pip Tesla to have the most vehicle sales for their C-Line 7, the mid-size SUV.
Yeah, and Tesla have held that top spot for as long as we can remember, right?
Yeah.
So that's a pivotal moment, perhaps, that BYD is taking that top spot. And they have, in global sales, I think, led Tesla for some time, with a lot of that being sort of in the domestic China market. But yeah, interesting that it seems that Aussies are jumping on board and trusting the brand as well.
Yeah, well, it's a social proof thing, right? It's why we expect to see really sharp upticks, the hockey stick, as they say, as more and more people buy vehicles, because you get this effect of when you go to the shops, if you see 3 BYDs, well, of course you're going to trust a BYD because it's no longer this strange new thing. You can see people driving them all around you. And I actually had this experience myself. My local council has just gone and bought a fleet, or part of their fleet is now BYD Dolphins, which was a bit of a surprise to see such a tiny vehicle badged up for the council. But if there are people like that who have considerable buying power, they've got fleets of, I think, a couple of hundred vehicles, they're now buying Chinese-made, very small, very sharply priced electric vehicles. It's those signals that are going to keep that run going and make people think, oh, this is just a normal part of the landscape now.
Yeah, and that BYD Dolphin is a very cool car. I would say if you're in that small car market, it's one to take a look at. So that's a pretty good segue to talk about the EVs that have launched in 2025. I've got some figures here that say by the end of 2024, we had 123 models on the market, and by September 2025, that had jumped up to 153, so an extra 30 by the third quarter, and probably safe to say that we're almost 40 EV models were launched last year.
Yeah, and I've heard anecdotally that we're on track for close to 200 by the end of 2026 of announcements that have already been made.
Right, yeah, that's right. A lot of these brands sort of commit to bringing a model out years in advance in some cases. So that's, the choice is significantly expanded. And I think what's interesting to note is that a lot of that choice is at unprecedented price levels. So sub 40 grand, sub 50 grand, which sort of brings it into more of a mass market. I think some of those brands are lacking some of the social proof that you were talking about there.
Yeah.
And in fairness, they're investing really heavily in some of these events to get the exposure, but it just takes time, right?
Yeah, it takes time. It takes people seeing them on the street, seeing them at the local shops, seeing more and more ads. And you can see that, certainly I've seen this even recently going to my local Westfield. Denza, one of the newest brands to land in Australia, has these huge ads on every floor of every level of Westfield. And that's the way to do it, right? Just put it in front of people until it starts to feel familiar.
Yeah. And so just to call out some of the bigger brands that have launched, so Geely, Zeekr, Xpeng, big Chinese brands that are mainstay big players back in the Chinese market that have made their first entrance into Australia. IM, which is a MG brand, I think they're focusing on a bit more of a premium line through IM. The Cadillac brought their first model out here, definitely on the more luxury end of EVs, and many more, but those are some of the brands that I think will become more household names in 2 or 3 years' time.
Yeah, that's what we expect. And there's also smaller manufacturers, or at least smaller in Australia, that are essentially brand new, that have big followings or big market share in China, and they've made their first move here. Maybe in 12 months we'll see them on the list as well. We're talking companies like Deepal, Denza, GAC, most of these being subsidiaries of bigger companies like Geely, and we'll just see what happens with them over the next 12 months.
Yeah, and another personal aside is that I sold my diesel van last year.
That's a milestone for someone who works in EV.
So it's time to get the second EV while I can still take advantage of this novated lease back in the market for another EV. So I won't give anything away now, but at some point in the next few episodes, I'll be able to report back in terms of what has been added to the garage.
Okay. Do we have a big enough following for you to try to leverage some discounts from an OEM, or maybe not yet?
No, I don't think I want to destroy our journalistic integrity by...
Of course, independence first.
So, yeah, very exciting to see all these models come out. If I'm honest, I'm really holding out for an EV ute. So the Shark's a good step in the right direction. Actually, a pretty awesome truck, but going to a hybrid feels like a step backwards. So I'm waiting. The Hilux is supposed to come out in an electric version this year. Best case would be the Rivian, but as far as I know, they have no plans to bring that out here, but I'll have to see what launches.
Yeah, it seems to be a bit of a case of almost there, almost there, almost there. We've heard from a few manufacturers, Toyota being one of them, and it seems like we're finally getting close to an electric ute. But there's other manufacturers who keep promising, but there's no real signs of any onshore dates yet. So it's a bit hard for people. We're not real tradies, but I drive a ute because I'm always throwing things in the back of my truck. You've definitely got a use for it up where you are. So you can imagine that we're certainly not the only ones who are holding out, waiting for a reliable, solid, well-priced, fully battery electric ute.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget about the Ford Lightning F-150.
May it rest in peace.
Is it fully gone? It's just or we still get one for a cool 150K? Or
you'll probably still find them, and there may even be some still being imported, but the official word came out towards the end of last year that they're no longer going to be in production.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that's a good indicator to some of these brands that it, probably needs to be below that luxury car tax threshold so that you can do it under a novated lease, which I think is roughly 90K. And yeah, that's just, in reality, there's an affordability factor for tradies and if they're buying them as a fleet for the company, it's probably not going to be that price range.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to make sure the vehicle suits your target market in every regard. Some people who are buying their first or second EV are purely driven by the sustainability aspect. Many more, certainly the mass market, are going to be driven by price. So it's got to be the right price for the right vehicle, for the right person. And that's what we're really starting to see across a lot of the market, especially mid and small SUVs, and particularly the very small vehicles, like those coming out from BYD, the Dolphin that's already here, and the Atto 1 that's been announced for 2026, which will be the cheapest electric vehicle on the market, I think at 23 or 24 grand, drive away.
That's crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, if there was ever a question still lingering about whether the long-term or potentially even upfront ownership cost of an EV can compete with a petrol car, I think that's just put to bed.
Yeah. If that wasn't already answered for some people, I think 2026 will be the nail in the coffin of that argument.
So let's talk about some of the EV policies that the government at state and federal level has brought in 2025. I think we started the year with the new vehicle energy emission standards, which were long overdue, possibly not as as high as we could have hoped, but a critical step. And, there was a risk that Dutton would have gone in and ripped those out as well. So we survived that, and we're no longer the dumping ground for some of those toxic diesel cars and petrol cars that was the case only just over 12 months ago.
Yeah, and so a lot of the things that those who are opposed to the vehicle emissions standards suggested were going to happen, like the sky was going to fall in, that prices of vehicles were going to actually skyrocket for consumers because of the legacy manufacturers having to make up for their margins, all these sorts of things. We didn't really see that happen. The changes basically had the effect that we wanted it to, which is more efficient, more sustainable vehicles on our shores, and the vehicles that aren't really contributing in the way that we want, that have high emissions, we don't have the option to buy here in Australia anymore, which is the way it should be in a developed country, which is very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, I don't know if we celebrate that, but it's very, very happy that we're not in the situation we were. And so, as we've spoken about, the novated lease fringe benefit tax exemption is continuing on. However, as of the 1st of April in 2025, it was no longer eligible for the plug-in hybrids, which were included up until that point. So now it's purely zero emissions, which from my perspective is a good thing. But it does mean that it narrows the choice or range of cars that people can get under that fringe benefit tax exemption.
Yeah, and we know that is a huge driver of electric vehicle uptake. There's a really significant portion of people who are getting new EVs, particularly getting their first EVs, are doing that through a novated lease, getting access to the fringe benefits tax exemption, and as a result, getting a significantly cheaper vehicle, usually arranged through their work or sometimes directly through a novated lease company.
Yeah, and we should say that's a big thing in Australia, but also in many other markets around the world. The EV leasing market in the UK, for example, we know is absolutely enormous. So this is one of the key drivers to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles by making them insanely cheaper, particularly if you're on a higher tax bracket. You're effectively just saving that entire percentage of what you would have been paying on tax off the cost of the car and its running expenses. There is obviously some interest to factor in, but the interest rate is going to be far lower than your tax rate. So
exactly,
there's some good benefit there. But I think, as we've talked about with the expanding range of zero emission electric vehicles, it seems fairly well timed by the government, possibly accidentally on their part, but they're pulling back from the FEVs when the battery EVs are expanding in terms of affordability range. So really, if you want a novated lease, you've still got pretty much as broad an option set as you did last year.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's what government policy is about. It's incentivizing behavioral change only when there's a need. If the market was doing that on its own, like we're seeing with hybrids, there's a huge uptick in the purchase of hybrids, which means that we probably don't need government policy to encourage people to make that decision. Never mind the fact that we might not even want them to make that decision. We might want them to go straight to battery electric. These things are there to help aid the transition when market forces alone might not. And so that's exactly what we're left with, encouraging people to go to full battery electric because that market still has a long way to go.
Yeah, that's very true, Dan. And I think the policies that we've spoken about at length on this podcast are the ones that cover those new charging stations, the DC fast charging stations, and also some of the AC ones that we spoke about with Andrew Foster from EVX. Obviously, we spoke to Paul Fox, EV, who've been very active in all of those ARENA grant-funded sites all across Australia. Similarly, NRMA have taken advantage of a lot of that funding as well. So that continued all across Australia. There's probably no need to dive back into that, but it's great to see that the number of charge points available, even if some of the ones in northern New South Wales are a bit dodgy, are broadly increasing. And I think it'd be remiss to reflect on 2025 without talking about V2G.
Hot topic. Well, hot topic of the last 5 years, but yeah, particularly 2025.
One of our favourite things to talk about on this podcast, but it's probably fair to say it's still in that trials, early development phase. We're not at a mass market level for V2G yet, although we're getting much closer. I think to look at some of the big milestones that we did get to, Arena launched a national roadmap for bidirectional charging, and that's publicly available. Anyone can go look at that. They've made 18 suggested changes to the industry, the rules, the customer profile. Some of the key ones that I pulled out were suggesting that dynamic network tariff rule changes should come in terms of their timeline. They were suggesting the first few months of 2026, and I think we've already heard about trial tariffs with Ausgrid. And this is one of the big things that some of our guests have talked about, is one of the huge limiters to operating these charging stations is the cost that they incur under these tariffs that weren't designed for EV charging stations. So their changes suggest that they make changes as soon as possible to the network rules, and those will be widely available to the market by 2027. So potentially by the end of this year.
Let's break that one down for anyone who doesn't talk and think in network tariffs. What does this actually mean?
Yeah, so Australia is broken down into a number of jurisdictions, and each part of the electricity network is owned by a single company, and they're called Distributed Network Service Providers, DNSPs, and they own the poles and wires. It's a monopoly. They charge their fees through your electricity bill. You don't see it directly on a residential bill, but someone like, let's say, EV, who are managing a fleet of EV chargers, or NRMA, they will see the network charges broken out. And they usually charge a hefty daily fee, so some type of fixed charge that, if no one's plugging into a charger for a few months in some of these regional spots, you're still paying every day to have it alive. And they also charge a high fee for the maximum amount that you draw from any fixed point within the grid. So that means, let's say you've got a EV charger, very fast EV charger capable of going all the way up to 350 kilowatts, and the Porsche Taycan or whatever the vehicle that can actually charge at that rate comes along, you'll then be charged at that maximum draw, instantaneous draw, for the whole month. So that multiplies out for 30, 60, 90 days. And in some cases in Ausgrid, they'll take the highest peak and then charge you for the next 12 months on what that draw is.
Okay.
And their argument is that they need to maintain a network and poles and wires that is capable of delivering your maximum demands, which has some merit, but it's basically destructive to these types of business models where you're getting very occasional high usage. And what a lot of these companies have spoken about is that they're open to limiting that usage if it's at a time that's problematic to the network. So I think what these new dynamic network tariffs will look like is having some kind of exception or specialist ruling for EV charging stations that also allow the network to throttle or intervene at times where actually pulling 350 kilowatts would be detrimental to the network. So the driver in his Porsche might be limited down to 50 kilowatts or 100 kilowatts, maybe even for just a few minutes as this network event happens, and they may get full capacity back again. In most cases, I think they just show up and charge at the normal rate, but that's the sort of flexible and dynamism that we need in these network tariffs going forward.
Okay, that's a great explainer, a really easy way to understand what is actually quite a complex problem, and just a symptom, like you said at the beginning, of these tariffs and rules being set up in a world that predates electric vehicle charging by decades. So it's a case of catching up for the current needs of the market. Yeah,
that's it. And so, look, moving on, we had the first Clean Energy Council certified bidirectional charger. So the rule changes with AS 4777 came in, would have been late 2024, which basically enabled chargers to be used in the Australian market, bidirectional chargers. They need to go through a process of being certified by the Clean Energy Council. And the Vita Grid Numbat charger was the first one to do it. So hats off to them. Beat Sig Energy, Red Earth, Wallbox, some of these other charging companies, StarCharge, who I think are actually a little more well-known than them. So it came a little bit it took me by surprise that it was V2 Grid.
Yes, same for me. Some of those bigger players, particularly StarCharge, who enormous in Asia, particularly in China, we expected to see them at the forefront. And while they weren't far behind, it was great to see a little Australian company being the first one to market.
Yeah, and
it is worth saying that while it's very exciting, we are really at the very beginning of this technology being a consumer product, and it is priced accordingly. So I think the Numbat is currently on the market for around the $10,000 mark. It really is right now for those who are really keen, the energy nerds, the enthusiasts. But over the next few years, we'll definitely see those sorts of prices come down.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I think, having spoken to some of these EV charging companies, I think the long run price isn't going to be that much different to a regular charger. The infrastructure in there to enable bidirectional charging, it's not game changing. It's a slight addition. And the challenge at the moment is, of course, is they're not at any type of scale of production because it's not the masses that are getting into this. It's small pilot programs. And that's another thing to call out on V2G in 2025 is that we've had a whole myriad of pilot programs, most of which have been government funded, some of which run by electricity retailers, AGL, Origin, Amber Electric have all had programs. But one that I had a bit of a closer look into is one run by Horizon Power, who are one of these network providers, DNSPs in Western Australia. Not Perth, we're talking the regional areas of WA. And they ran a trial in Exmouth, which is up north. It's a little tourist area up there. And basically, they were trying to demonstrate, and successfully did demonstrate, that EVs could be used to stabilize their microgrid. So they don't have the benefit that we do on the East Coast of having lots of different coal, renewables, power stations to support a diversified power source. They're running off, in a lot of cases, diesel generators or quite small renewable sites. So they were able to prove is that EVs and V2G charging was able to stabilize their microgrid in some of those tourist areas like Exmouth that have large fluctuations in demand. The trial also importantly demonstrated that the V2G had no negative impact on the battery health of the cars. So that's obviously one that I think owners would be concerned about, is like what's going to happen with the car. And also, of course, manufacturers and OEMs are wondering, will this affect our ability to provide a warranty, which is still one of the big roadblocks for us.
Yeah, and it's a roadblock that has been overcome in a temporary way because some of the OEMs who were involved in these V2G trials, BYD I think was the first who were involved in the Amber trial, as well as some others, were the first OEM to change their warranties for this trial to make sure that they can get as much data as possible. And those owners who are putting their hand up to take part and be the guinea pigs know that they're not going to end up with a shot battery. But I think more and more trials are going to show us that this doesn't have a significant impact on battery health. And one of the key reasons is the speed of the energy discharge. Those who are in battery chemistry or really get into that sort of stuff know that it's actually the speed of power going in or out of a battery that has the biggest impact on degradation. For V2G, yes, the power is going both ways, but at a relatively low speed, limited by the transformer in the car. And so that's very unlikely, and we'll see this proven out, I hope, in all the trials, very unlikely to have any negative impact. And, well, fingers crossed, that'll mean battery warranties will include bidirectional charging in the future.
Yeah, and like as a personal example, I know that when I'm in the BYD on the freeway going up a hill, sometimes you'll see that it shows what power is being drawn from the battery, and it'll get over 50 kilowatts, 60 kilowatts in some cases at the very peak. And yeah, like the charge rate from these chargers is usually through AC connections, so it's often capped at 7 kilowatts or in under 3-phase 22 kilowatts. So it's much lower than the typical range of stress that you're putting on the battery by driving.
Yeah.
And look, the final one I had noted here, which came towards the end of the year, was that Ausgrid had announced that they connected their first operational bidirectional charger. And when this came out, it felt a little bit too insignificant and too late for me. They of course wanted to celebrate the first charger, but I think we're so far along the journey to celebrate having a bidirectional charger at the end of 2025 feels a bit slow to me. Is that unfair, Dan?
Look, everyone should be able to celebrate their wins, and I'm sure it's a win for the team and the people who were working on that for a long time. But I do agree with your sentiment. Onwards and upwards, the industry's moving fast, and the challenges are never ending. So on to the next.
Yeah, well, that is a good point then to start talking about what's coming next. And I thought we could take some time, Dan, to put some pen on paper and make some predictions for what we think might happen for 2026. I know you've prepared some.
Yeah, I've been looking into my crystal ball.
And this is the point where we can either prove that we're experts or demonstrate how little we actually know. So
maybe a bit of both.
I will give you one of mine to begin with, which is the top selling ute in 2026 will be a PHEV, plug-in hybrid. So I would prefer it to be a battery EV, but I just don't think we're going to have anything for the next 6 months. So I think what we've seen with the BYD Shark is just so impressive. Like the amount of sales they hit so quickly. I was actually talking to one of my mates who runs an electrical company, and I would say, in fairness to him, he's not a climate warrior. He's the opposite. He cares about function. He's actually more of a petrol head, to be honest. And I was like, "Oh, have you seen the BYD Shark? What do you think about that?" And honestly, he said I would have bought it if it had more towing power. And so he'd had a good look at it. And this took me by surprise because I thought he'd be Ford Ranger till he dies. And so the fact that he was keen on the BYD and the only issue was that it doesn't quite have the tow power to drag his caravan around on holidays, which apparently they're solving with the next iteration of the Shark. That for me means that the Shark's really paved the way for other hybrid utes and maybe the sales of its own, the Shark itself to be that number one. And it's not too far behind if you look at monthly sales on the Ranger and the Hilux, which
are two of the best-selling cars in the country.
That's right. So,
okay, big prediction. I can see it happening. I've actually had similar conversations to the one that you mentioned. I've heard other people in the industry, having had those opportunities to talk to people who've been driving diesel utes for 40 years and have managed to get those people into a Shark. So I can see it happening. All right, I'll jump in here. One on my list, and this maybe is a bit of a foolish one to say out loud, but I really do feel that 2026 is the year that we'll see the start of that sharp uptick in sales. So far, we've seen slow and steady growth, slower than predicted, but growth nonetheless. But the price parity with ICE vehicles, the range of vehicles available on the market, I think public charging infrastructure is reaching that point where fewer and fewer people are concerned about it being an issue for them. I do think 2026 will be the year when we start to see a tick and more people buying EVs at a faster rate.
Give us a number. We're at 10%. I think it was 8% of new vehicles this year. You can do it on new vehicles, or we're at 103,000 BEVs this year. Do you want to put a number on the BEVs?
Oh, putting a number to it, that makes it a bit scarier. So I think that if we're 8.3% of new vehicles battery electric, I think we might be getting close to 15% next year.
Wow. You heard it first. That would be stellar. That would get us back to sort of a comparable number to some of the European markets that for years have outstripped us. So that would be amazing.
All right. What's your next one?
So I'm not going to throw a name out here, but I think that one of the big DC fast charging companies is going to go bust. Okay. A bit of a negative one, but I think, look, we're just at this early stage of getting the business model right. It's an early market. I think if you look at any business, any market, not all the companies make it.
Especially the early players. Some of them pave the way for the others and step aside.
And I think that some of these businesses may get caught up with technology that doesn't pan out in the long run as they'd hoped. So not that I think it's a negative. I think we'll probably end up with more DC fast charging companies at the end of 2025, but I think we might see someone hit the dust.
Yeah. Consolidation, I think, is the word, whether it's people or companies completely disappearing or just being acquired by the bigger players in the market. It's an interesting one. All right. Another one of my predictions for this year is that we're going to see the secondhand market really take off. It's been a bit of a concern for some people that the secondhand EV market was obviously very immature. There'd be a lot of concerns about how long batteries are going to last, what happens if the battery dies, or if you buy a secondhand EV and all of a sudden the battery isn't what you expected. That's pretty much been solved. There's accessible, relatively cheap battery health testing, which is being done by some of the big players, like some of the auction houses. And as well, there's just more of an established market and more trust around the quality of EVs and the quality of the batteries over time. So when we start to see not just people who are flush with cash or people who are enthusiasts buying EVs, but regular folks who are, maybe price constrained, but looking at that sort of 20, 25, 30K price mark and able to find an EV for themselves, that's really going to increase with the normalization of the technology.
Yeah, look, it's a really good prediction there, Dan. So I like that. I hope it comes true. To throw my last one out there, a bit of this one I feel least confident about, but I do hope it has some potential, which is we see a big growth in electric motorcycles. And you and I got the chance to see some of these new models that I'd never seen before at Everything Electric last year.
Yeah, I even got to ride one, which is good fun. The FTN, shout out to the FTN guys.
Yeah, and shout out to Sam from Savage who joined the pod as well. So I think these motorbikes, they look amazing. They really, for motorbike enthusiasts, for people who ride motorbikes already, they offer a lot of advantages. The simplicity, the lack of maintenance, the actual speed and performance of the bikes, which usually often people on bikes are, love nipping around and having that acceleration. So I think once they hit that tipping point, we're going to see a big uplift and we could hit sort of 10,000, 20,000 sales. I think it probably does need one of the big brands, the Honda or the Kawasaki, to bring out something to really spike that market. It'll be, we know even just from sort of production levels that some of those smaller companies we mentioned won't be able to sort of make a huge hit. So I think it takes one of the big guys, the big Japanese manufacturers to bring and push a model out here.
That's an interesting prediction. And it's a bit of, I've always thought of the motorcycle market as opposed to, let's say, the electric scooter market. The motorcycle market is this real catch-22 because people who've ridden motorbikes for a long time, they're usually petrol heads, right? They love motors, they love the sound. And you'd think that would turn them off electric, but they also love speed and they love control and they love a vehicle that handles well. And that's where the electrics really come to the fore. So yeah, it'll be an interesting spot or space to watch transform.
Yeah, very good. Well, do you have a prediction to close us out, Dan?
I do. And some people might think this is a bit of a boring one, but it's pretty close to what we do here at Solar Choice. And I reckon that 2026 is going to see a really big uptick in the ratio of smart chargers that people get in their homes. We're talking about 7 kilowatt fast wall chargers, the ones that you see on people's garages and increasingly, slowly but surely, in apartment buildings as well. These chargers, you generally have two options. You've got the dumb charger, you plug it in and then power flows through, you turn it off, power stops.
Yeah, and two data points that I think feed into that is, one is the government has announced that they're mandating a free window of power. So 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., I believe, will be free power. And anyone that's got an EV will be wanting to charge in that window. So if you don't have solar, if you had solar already, then people are already trying to connect up, the solar to the EV. But if you don't, you're a renter, you'll still have access to this really cheap power in the middle of the day. And the only way to take advantage of that with an EV is being able to charge fast. Because my experience after a day of driving or with the granny charger, the wall plug-in, you're taking 8 to 10 hours, and that's just too slow to take advantage of those windows. And you end up having to charge at 50 cents a kilowatt hour in the evenings. And the other data point, I think, is the emergence of these wholesale linked plans. So Amber Electric, we've mentioned. There's also Flow Power, who have a wholesale linked electricity plan, which means that you have exposure to the underlying ups and downs of the electricity market, which can be both good and bad. In the middle of the day, it sometimes means that you'll actually be getting paid to use your power. So instead of free charging, you could actually be getting paid a small 2 cents a kilowatt hour to put electricity into your car, which seems very baffling. But it also means that sometimes you could be paying a very high rate of power, often in the evenings in that kind of 5:30 to 7:30 window. Well, that's a pretty good wrap, I think, for last year. Some pot shots at what might happen this year. We'll check in 12 months and probably have a laugh at how far off we were. But that's all for today. Any final thoughts, Dan?
Look, I'm just great to be back for the new year. Like we said at the start, we've got some great guests coming up and a bit more of a mix this year. You know, in the past, we've been very EV charging focused. That's still the core of what we do, but we're bringing in even more interesting guests who have insight into different parts of the industry. So yeah, the next few episodes will give you a bit of the lay of the land as to what's in store.
So thanks, guys. This has been the EV Charging Podcast, brought to you as always by Solar Choice, Australia's only online quote comparison tool where you can compare quotes for solar, batteries, EV charging, hot water systems, and air conditioning. Thanks for joining us. Share this with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe so you can hear our next pod, which will be coming soon.
Thanks, guys. See you on the next one. That's it for today. Thanks for listening, and make sure you share an episode with someone that you think might enjoy it. Leave us a review, leave us a comment. It really does make a difference for us. And if you need a quote for anything related to home electrification, solar, batteries, heat pumps, aircon, and of course EV charging, head to solarchoice.net.au to get instant quotes from pre-vetted installers. See you next month.